At my granddaughter's wedding, they handed me a name tag that read, "The Absent Old Lady." I didn't say anything. I didn't look up. I just stood there, holding it, reading it again. If you're listening, stay with me. And tell me where you're watching from. I never thought I would tell this story, but some things shouldn't stay quiet forever. The ballroom was already full. Soft music, warm lights, people laughing in small groups like everything was exactly the way it should be. White tablecloths, crystal glasses, gold accents on every chair. It was a beautiful wedding. Expensive, carefully arranged. Exactly the kind of wedding she always said she wanted. My granddaughter. I adjusted the edge of the card between my fingers. The paper was thick, printed clean. Not a mistake. Not something someone wrote by hand as a joke. It had been made, prepared, placed with the others. Deliberately. I looked around slowly. Guests were picking up their own name cards. Smiling. Finding their tables. Mr. and Mrs. Carter. Bridesmaid. Family. Clear roles. Clear places. And then, there was mine. The absent old lady. I turned it slightly in my hand, just to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. But I hadn't. The words didn't change. They sat there, exactly as they were meant to be read. I didn't look for her right away. I didn't need to. Because something like that doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't come from confusion. It comes from a decision. And decisions like that are never made alone. Someone walked past me. A woman in a soft blue dress. She glanced at the card in my hand, just for a second, then looked away, too quickly, like she had seen enough and didn't want to be part of it. That told me something. Not everything, but enough. I slipped the card between my fingers, holding it loosely now, because the first reaction is never the one that matters. The second one is. And mine was quiet. I walked toward the seating chart. Not rushed, not hesitant, just steady, because if they were going to define me, I wanted to see exactly how far they had taken it. The board stood near the entrance. Large, elegant, names printed in careful rows, table numbers, assignments, everything. Organized. I scanned it slowly, row by row, not looking for my name, looking for where I belonged, or where they had decided I didn't. I found her first. My granddaughter. Bride. Centered. Clear. Exactly where she wanted to be. Then the others. Her parents. Her friends. Her new family. Everyone had a place. Everyone except me. I moved my eyes down again. More names. More tables. And then I saw it. Not my name, but a space. Table 14. At the very edge. Near the back. Not quite hidden, but not meant to be seen either. And next to it, instead of a name, a label. The absent old lady. I stood there for a moment. Long enough to understand this wasn't about seating. It wasn't about organization. It was about something else. Something quieter. Something colder. They hadn't forgotten me. They had placed me exactly where they wanted me to be. I stepped back from the board. The music shifted slightly. Laughter rose somewhere behind me. Everything continued, as if nothing was wrong. As if this was normal. I looked down at the card again. The absent old lady. Absent. That word stayed longer than the rest. Because I was there. Standing in the room. Holding the proof. And yet, they had already decided. I wasn't. I didn't confront anyone. Not then. Not there. Because moments like this aren't about reaction. They're about understanding. And I needed to understand how something like this had been allowed to happen. Or worse, how long it had been planned. I placed the card back on the table. Carefully. Exactly where I found it. Because I wasn't going to carry it. Not yet. Not until I knew what it really meant. I turned slightly. And this time, I looked for her. Across the room. Near the center. Smiling. Laughing. Surrounded. Exactly where she believed she belonged. And for a brief moment, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Not in her expression, but in the way people stood around her. Close. But careful. Supportive. But watching. Like they knew something, but weren't going to say it out loud. I held that thought. Didn't chase it. Didn't push it further. Because one thing was already clear. This wasn't a mistake. And it wasn't small. It was a message. And I had just received it. The only question now was why they thought I wouldn't understand it. I didn't go to table 14 right away. I stayed where I was, just a few steps away from the seating board, watching people move past me like nothing had happened. Because for them, nothing had. Glasses clinked. Music softened, then lifted again. Someone laughed too loudly near the bar. The room was alive. Warm. Celebratory. And I was standing in the middle of it, holding something that didn't belong there. Or maybe something that belonged more than anything else. I picked up a glass of water from a nearby tray, not because I was thirsty, just to give my hands something to do. Because standing still too long makes people notice you. And I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I moved slowly through the room. Not toward anyone. Not away either. Just through. Because sometimes you see more when you're not part of anything. I passed table 3. Laughter. Photos being taken. Phones held up. Table 6. A group of women leaning close together, whispering, then pulling back like nothing had been said. Table 9. Family. Or what was left of it. People I recognized. People who recognized me. They nodded. Smiled. But none of them called my name. None of them asked where I was sitting. That told me something too. Not everything, but enough. Because silence is rarely accidental. I kept walking. Slow. Measured. Until I reached the edge of the room. Table 14. Smaller than the others. Placed just far enough away that it didn't interrupt anything important. 2 chairs. One already taken. A man I didn't recognize. Older. Quiet. He glanced up as I approached, then looked back down at his plate. No greeting. No question. Just acknowledgement. Like he already understood why we were both there. I pulled out the chair across from him. Sat down. The distance between us felt intentional. Not awkward. Arranged. Like everything else tonight. I placed my hands on the table. Looked at the place setting. Simple. No name. Just space. Because my name had already been decided somewhere else. I let that sit for a moment. Didn't push it away. Didn't react to it. Just accepted it for what it was. Across the room, I could see her again. The bride. Standing under the lights. Surrounded. Celebrated. Exactly where she wanted to be. And I wondered not why she did it, but when she decided to. Because something like this doesn't begin at a wedding. It begins long before. In smaller moments. Quieter ones. The kind you don't notice until they become something you can't ignore. I reached for the glass of water. Took a small sip. Set it back down. Because now, this wasn't about the name tag anymore. It was about the story behind it. And I had a feeling. I was only just starting to see it. I didn't eat. Not because the food wasn't good. It was carefully arranged. Beautifully presented. Just like everything else in that room. But I wasn't there for the meal anymore. I was there to understand something. Across from me, the man at the table adjusted his napkin. Still quiet. Still distant. Like me. After a moment, he spoke. Wrong table. His voice was low. Not curious. Certain. I looked at him. No, I said. He nodded once. That was enough. Because people like us don't need explanations. We recognize placement when we see it. I looked back across the room. At her. At the center of everything. Laughing again. Holding someone's hand. Turning slightly so the photographer could capture the moment. Perfect. Every angle. Every movement. Perfect. And for a second, I remembered a different version of her. Smaller. Quieter. Sitting at my kitchen table with her feet not quite touching the floor. Asking for more pie. Just a little more, she used to say. I used to give her more. Always. Because that's what you do. You don't measure things when it comes to family. You give. Freely. Without keeping count. I rested my hand lightly against the table. Because somewhere along the way, that changed. Not suddenly. Not in a way you notice right away. Just gradually. The calls became shorter. The visits less frequent. And when she did come by, it was never for long. Always somewhere else to be. Always something more important waiting. I told myself it was normal. People grow up. They move on. That's how life works. But now, sitting at that table, holding on to everything I had, just seen, it didn't feel like distance anymore. It felt like preparation. Like something had been shifting long before tonight. A server approached. Set a plate in front of me. Carefully. Without looking directly at me. Enjoy your meal, she said softly. I nodded. But I didn't reach for the fork. Because appetite comes from peace. And I wasn't there yet. Across the room, I saw her speak to someone I recognized. A man in a dark suit. Older. Not family. But familiar in a different way. The kind of person who doesn't belong to the celebration, but to what comes after it. I watched as they spoke. Briefly. Quietly. Then he nodded and stepped back. She turned away almost immediately. Like the conversation had already served its purpose. That stayed with me. Not because of what was said, but because of how it ended. Quick. Efficient. Planned. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Because now, the pieces weren't just forming. They were connecting. The distance. The silence. The name tag. None of it stood alone anymore. It was part of something larger, something that had been building quietly over time. And I had missed it, not because I wasn't paying attention, but because I trusted the wrong things. I trusted time. I trusted history. I trusted the idea that family doesn't need to be questioned. But that idea doesn't always hold, especially when something else becomes more important. Money, status, control. I didn't know yet which one it was. Maybe all of them. But I knew this much. That label, the absent old lady, wasn't just an insult. It was a decision, a way of rewriting something, of placing me outside before I even had a chance to step in. I glanced down at the empty space in front of me. No name, no identity, just a seat. And suddenly, I understood something I hadn't before. They didn't want me gone. Not exactly. They wanted me redefined, reduced, easier to move around, easier to ignore, because it's harder to take something from someone who still has a place. But if that place is gone, then everything else becomes easier. I looked up again, at the lights, at the room, at the people who continued celebrating as if nothing had shifted. And I realized something else. This wasn't the moment it started. This was just the moment it became visible. I picked up the glass of water again, took a slow sip, because now I wasn't just watching anymore. I was beginning to understand. And understanding is where everything changes. I didn't look at her again right away, because sometimes watching too much makes you react too soon. And I wasn't ready to react. Not yet. The music shifted. Slower now. The kind of song that brings people closer together. Chairs moved. Voices softened. Couples stood. Walked toward the center of the room. The first dance. Of course. Everyone turned toward them. Toward her. Toward the moment that was meant to matter most. I stayed where I was. At table 14. At the edge of everything. And from there, I could see it more clearly. Not the dance, but the space around it. Who stood close? Who stepped back? Who watched, and who didn't? My son was there. Not beside me. Not even looking in my direction. Standing near her, like that's where he had chosen to belong. That told me more than anything else that night. Not what they said, but what they didn't. No one came over. No one asked if I needed anything. No one questioned the table, the label, the placement. And silence like that is never accidental. It's agreed on. I rested my hands in my lap. Still, because by then, I wasn't wondering if this was intentional anymore. I was wondering how many people already knew. The music faded slightly. Applause followed. Laughter again. Everything moved forward, just as planned. And that's when I understood something important. This wasn't about one moment. Not the name tag. Not the table. This was about position. About where they had already placed me before I ever walked into that room. I looked down at the empty space in front of me. No name. No role. And for the first time that night, I stopped feeling surprised. Because this didn't start today. It just finally showed itself. I stayed through the dance. Not because I wanted to, but because leaving too early would have made it about me. And this was never about me reacting. It was about them revealing. The music picked up again. Faster now. People returned to their tables. Laughter grew louder. Glasses refilled. The celebration continued. Perfectly. Like nothing had shifted at all. A server passed by my table again. Paused for a moment. "Can I bring you anything else?" she asked. I looked up at her. She held my gaze just a second longer than necessary. Then added, quietly, "I can move you to another table if you'd like." There it was. Not loud. Not official. But real. I shook my head. "No," I said. Soft. "Thank you." She nodded. Didn't argue. Didn't insist. Just moved on. Because even she understood something wasn't right. And still, nothing changed. That told me everything I needed to know. Across the room, I saw her again. My granddaughter. Moving from table to table. Greeting people. Smiling. Accepting congratulations. But she never came near mine. Not once. Not by accident. Not even briefly. Like there was an invisible line she had already decided not to cross. I watched her from a distance. Not emotionally. Carefully. Because avoidance is a decision too. And decisions like that don't happen in the moment. They're made ahead of time. Planned. Just like the name tag. Just like the table. Just like everything else that night. I leaned back slightly in my chair. The room blurred for a second. Not physically. Just in the way it felt. Because once you understand the pattern, you stop seeing individual moments. You see the design. And the design was simple. Keep me present, but remove my place. Keep me visible, but without a role. Make it easier to move forward without me. I exhaled slowly, not in frustration, not in anger, just recognition, because this wasn't confusion anymore. It was clarity, and clarity changes everything. I looked down at my hands, still steady, still calm, because whatever they thought they were doing, they were only showing me one thing, not where I stood, but where they believed I didn't. And that difference was about to matter. I didn't check the time. I didn't need to. You can feel when a night has already shown you everything it's going to show. And this one had. The music continued. The lights stayed warm. People kept smiling like nothing had shifted. But for me, something had already ended. Not loudly, quietly. I pushed my chair back. Slow, careful not to draw attention. Because leaving doesn't need to be announced when no one is waiting for you to stay. The man across from me glanced up again, just briefly, then nodded once. Not goodbye, just understanding. I returned the nod. That was enough. I stood up, smoothed the front of my dress. Everything still in place, exactly the way I had arrived. Except now, I understood where I stood. I walked past the tables again. Same laughter, same conversations. No one stopped me. No one called my name. Because I didn't have one there. Not anymore. Halfway to the exit, I heard her voice. Clear, light, the kind of voice meant to carry across a room. I didn't turn right away, but I slowed. We wanted everything to feel clean, she was saying. A small pause, then a softer laugh. Less complicated. Less complicated. That phrase stayed with me, because that's what I had become. A complication. Something easier to remove than to include. I turned slightly this time, just enough to see her. Still surrounded. Still smiling. Perfect from a distance. But now, I saw it differently. Not warmth. Precision. Not joy. Control. I didn't wait to hear more. I didn't need to. Because that sentence told me everything I hadn't fully accepted yet. This wasn't personal. Not in the way people think. It was practical. Calculated. Remove what doesn't fit. Simplify what remains. I turned back toward the door. Kept walking. Step by step. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady. Because once you understand the reason behind something, you stop questioning it. You start preparing for what comes next. The doors opened quietly as I reached them. Cool air met my face. Different from the warmth inside. Cleaner. I stepped outside. The noise faded behind me. Not completely. Just enough to remind me I was no longer part of it. I stood there for a moment, under the soft evening light, hands at my sides. Still, because leaving that room wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something else. Something they hadn't considered. Something they thought would never come from me. I took a slow breath, then exhaled. Calm. Because now, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was thinking. And that was where everything was about to change. I didn't go anywhere else that night. No calls. No detours. I drove straight home. The roads were quiet. Streetlights passed one by one, steady, predictable. Unlike everything I had just left behind. I kept both hands on the wheel. Not tense. Just focused. Because once something becomes clear, you don't drift anymore. You move with intention. I pulled into the driveway. The house stood exactly as it always had. Still. Familiar. Unchanged. I sat in the car for a moment. Not thinking about the wedding. Not replaying the night. Because I already understood it. There was nothing left to question there. What mattered now was here. I stepped inside. The air was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, but settled. I set my keys down. Everything in its place. Exactly where it should be. That mattered. Because tonight had shown me something simple. When people remove your place, they expect you to lose your position. But those two things aren't the same. I walked down the hallway, past the living room, past the photographs on the wall. Moments frozen in time. Smiles that meant something once. I didn't stop. Not for them. Because memories don't answer questions. They only remind you of what used to be. I reached the small desk. The one he used. The one no one else ever touched. I rested my hand on it for a second. Not out of hesitation. Out of recognition. Because suddenly, something he used to say made sense in a way it hadn't before. Just in case, he would tell me. I used to think that meant something distant. Something unlikely. But tonight, I understood. Just in case meant moments like this. I pulled the chair out. Sat down. Opened the drawer. Inside, everything was exactly as he left it. Neat. Ordered. Folders stacked carefully. Labels clear. No confusion. No gaps. I didn't rush. I reached for the one in the center. The one that felt intentional. Opened it. Paper. Thicker than the rest. Formal. I read the first line. Then the second. Then I stopped. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did. Completely. I leaned back slightly. In the chair. The room didn't change. The light didn't shift. But something inside me settled. Because everything I had seen that night, everything I had heard, everything I had started to question, suddenly had context. Structure. Meaning. I looked down at the paper again. Names. Terms. Decisions. All made long before tonight. Long before they decided who I was. Or where I belonged. I closed the folder slowly. Not in shock. Not in anger. Just understanding. Because now, I knew something they didn't. Something they had built their entire plan around, without ever checking. I placed the folder back where it was. Exactly where he left it. Then I closed the drawer. Gently. Because this wasn't something to react to. It was something to use. I stood up. The house was still quiet. Unchanged. But I wasn't. Because now, the story they had written about me no longer mattered. What mattered was what he had already written, and how I was going to let them discover it. They didn't call that night. Of course they didn't. Moments like that need time to settle. Not for me. For them. Because people don't question what they believe is already secure. They move forward. Confident. Certain. And that's exactly what they did. It was 2 days later. Late morning. The house was quiet again. Sunlight through the kitchen window. Coffee still warm in my cup. Everything steady. Exactly the way I preferred it. Then my phone rang. I didn't rush to answer. I looked at the screen first. Her name. My granddaughter. I let it ring once more, then picked it up. Hello. A pause. Short. Measured. Hi. Grandma, she said. Her voice was softer than usual. Careful. Not distant like before. Adjusted. That told me something immediately. Tone changes when expectations shift. How are you, she asked. Simple question, but placed deliberately. I'm fine, I replied. Even. Calm. I didn't fill the silence that followed. Because silence invites people to reveal what they actually want. And right on time she did. We didn't get to talk at the wedding, she said. Didn't get to. Not couldn't. Didn't get to. I let that sit for a second. No, I said. We didn't. Another pause. Longer this time. Because now, she was deciding how to move forward. We were thinking, she continued. Maybe we could come by. Talk about a few things. There it was. Not an apology. Not an explanation. A transition. From event to intention. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Because I already knew what those few things were. The house. The accounts. The future. Everything they believed was already moving in their direction. What kind of things? I asked. Not challenging. Just clear. She hesitated. Just enough to confirm it. You know, everything that needs to be handled now, she said. Handled. That word again. Careful. Neutral. But pointed. I nodded slowly. Even though she couldn't see me. I see, I said. And I did. Completely. Because now, the night at the wedding, the name tag, the table, they all led here. This conversation. This moment. We just want to make things easier for you, she added. Easier. Another soft word. Another layer. I almost smiled. Not because it was amusing, but because it was expected. All right, I said. Simple. Calm. When would you like to come by? There was a shift on the other end. Relief. Subtle, but there. Because she thought this was going to be easy. That I would follow the path they had already prepared. This afternoon, she asked. I glanced toward the hallway. Toward the desk. Toward everything they didn't know. That works, I said. We ended the call shortly after. No long conversation. No details. Because none were needed. I placed the phone back on the table. The room stayed quiet. Unchanged. But now, something had moved forward. Not on their terms. On mine. I took a slow sip of coffee. Set the cup down. Because this wasn't about reacting to them anymore. It was about letting them step exactly where they thought they wanted to be. And when they did, they were going to realize something. They hadn't removed me. They had walked into something they didn't understand at all. They arrived exactly on time. Not early. Not late. Right on time. That told me something. This wasn't casual. This was planned. I heard the car pull into the driveway. Doors closing. 2 sets of footsteps. Closed together. Always together now. I didn't rush. To the door. I finished what I was doing first. Set the cup in the sink. Wiped the counter. Because this wasn't a moment to meet halfway. It was a moment to let them come to me. The knock came a few seconds later. Firm. Confident. Not hesitant. I walked to the door. Opened it. There she was, smiling, soft, carefully measured. And beside her my son, quiet, watching. "Hi, Grandma," she said. Like nothing had happened. Like the wedding was just another day. I stepped aside. "Come in." They walked past me. Not uncertain, not uncomfortable, just familiar. Like they had already decided how this would go. We moved into the living room. Same space, same furniture. But this time, the roles were different. They sat down first, close together, aligned. I took the chair across from them. Same distance, same calm. There was a short silence. Not empty, prepared. Then she spoke. "We've been thinking about things," she said. Of course they had. I nodded slightly. Didn't interrupt. Didn't help her find the words. Because what people say next, when you don't guide them, is always more honest. "There's just a lot to take care of now," she continued. Take care of. Another careful phrase. Neutral on the surface, but precise underneath. My son leaned forward slightly. "We just want to make sure everything runs smoothly," he added. Smoothly. Easier. Handled. The same pattern. Different words. Same intention. I folded my hands loosely in my lap. Calm. Listening. "And what exactly are you planning to take care of?" I asked. Simple. Clear. The kind of question that doesn't leave room to stay vague. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then continued. "The house, the accounts, everything that needs attention," she said. Everything. That word again. I nodded slowly. Like I was considering it. Like I hadn't already seen what they hadn't. "And how do you plan to do that?" I asked. Another pause. This one longer. Because now, they had to explain the part they hadn't fully thought through. "We can help manage things," she said. Manage. Not assist. Not support. Manage. That was the first honest word she had used. I let the silence stretch slightly. Not to make them uncomfortable, but to let the words sit exactly where it belonged. My son shifted in his seat. Subtle, but noticeable. Because now, even he could feel it. The gap between what they assumed and what was actually real. I leaned back slightly. Still calm. Still steady. Because this was the moment everything had been leading to. Not the wedding. Not the name tag. This. The moment they believed they were stepping into control. And that was exactly when people stopped being careful. I looked at both of them. At how certain they still tried to appear. At how aligned they thought they were. And for the first time since they walked in, I was ready to respond. I didn't correct her right away. I didn't interrupt. I let the words sit. Manage. Because sometimes the most important thing is letting people fully step into what they believe. I nodded once. "That sounds helpful," I said. A small shift. Not in what I said, but in how they received it. I saw it immediately. The way her shoulders eased slightly. The way my son leaned back just a fraction. Relief. Quiet. But real. Because they thought I was agreeing. And for now, I needed them to. I rested my hands lightly in my lap. Calm. Measured. "But before we do anything," I added, "I think we should go over everything carefully." Carefully. That word didn't alarm them. It made sense. It sounded reasonable. "Yes, of course," she said quickly. Too quickly. Because in her mind, this was just a step. Not a change in direction. "And we should probably involve the lawyer," I continued. That was the first moment something shifted. Subtle. But there. My son glanced at her. Quick. Almost instinctive. Then back at me. "Yeah, that makes sense," he said. But his voice wasn't as steady now. Because that word, lawyer, changes things. It moves the conversation out of assumption and into structure. And structure doesn't bend easily. She nodded. Slower this time. Still composed. Still controlled. But more careful now. "Of course," she said. I leaned forward slightly. Not aggressive. Just enough to shift the balance. "There are a few things I want to understand first," I said. Another pause. This one quieter. Because now, they weren't leading anymore. I was. "What exactly were you planning to manage?" I asked. Simple. Direct. But it required an answer. Not a suggestion. Not a soft phrase. A real answer. My son hesitated. Looked at her. Then back at me. "Well, everything that needs attention," he said. Still vague. Still careful. I nodded slowly. "And how were you going to do that?" That's when the rhythm changed. Just slightly. But enough. Because now, they were no longer presenting an idea. They were being asked to explain it. An explanation reveals what assumption hides. "We'd coordinate things, handle the paperwork. Make sure everything runs smoothly," she said. Smoothly. That word again. I let the silence stretch just a moment longer. Because now, they were waiting for my response. Expecting agreement. Expecting cooperation. Maybe even gratitude. Instead, I simply nodded. As if I understood. As if I accepted it. And in a way, I did. Not their plan, but their position. Because now, it was completely clear. They weren't asking. They were stepping forward based on something they believed was already theirs. And that belief was about to meet something they hadn't prepared for. No one spoke for a moment. Not after that last question. Not after the silence that followed it. Because something had shifted. Not loudly, but enough. I let it sit. Didn't rush to fill it. Because silence is where understanding begins. My son leaned back slightly. His hands moved, then stopped. Like he wasn't sure what to do with them anymore. That was new. She stayed still. Eyes on me. Measuring. Recalculating. Because now, the conversation wasn't moving the way she expected. And when control slips, people don't always show it right away. They adjust first. We're just trying to help, she said. Her tone softer now. Less certain. More careful. I nodded once. I understand, I replied. And I did. Completely. Because this was never about confusion. It was about assumption. An assumption only works when no one challenges it. I leaned forward slightly. Not confrontational. Just present. That's why I think it's best we go over everything with the lawyer, I said. There it was again. Clear. Unavoidable. This time, neither of them answered. Immediately. Because now they understood something. This wasn't going to stay in this room. It wasn't going to stay vague. It was going to be defined. And definition removes control from assumption. My son nodded first. Slow. Careful. Okay, he said. But it wasn't agreement anymore. It was adjustment. Acceptance of something he hadn't expected. She nodded too. Still composed. Still holding her posture. But quieter now. Because there was nothing left to guide. Nothing left to reshape. Only something to face. I stood up. Not abruptly. Just naturally. Because the conversation had reached its end. I'll make the call, I said. Simple. Final. They stood as well. Mirroring me. But the alignment was different now. Less certain. Less controlled. Because for the first time, since they walked into that house, they weren't sure what would happen next. And that uncertainty was new to them. We moved toward the door together. Quiet. Measured. No extra words. No attempt to return to what they had planned. Because they couldn't. Not anymore. At the door, my son paused. Just for a second. I didn't realize he started. Then stopped. Because realization doesn't always come with the right words. I nodded. I know, I said. And I did. Because not knowing is easy. Assuming is easier. But understanding takes something else. They stepped outside. The door closed softly behind them. And just like that, the house was quiet again. But this silence felt different. Not uncertain. Settled. Because now, everything had shifted. Not in what they said, but in what they finally understood. I didn't call the lawyer right away. I didn't need to. Because the moment had already done what it needed to do. They had come into my house, thinking they understood everything. And they had left, knowing they didn't. That was enough. For now, I walked back into the living room. The same room we had just sat in. Nothing had moved. The chairs were still in place. The light still fell across the floor the same way. But something had changed. Not in the room. In me. I sat down slowly. Not out of exhaustion. Out of clarity. Because for the first time since the wedding, I wasn't trying to understand anything anymore. I already did. I leaned back slightly. Let the silence settle around me. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but complete. My eyes drifted toward the hallway. Toward the desk. Toward everything he had left behind. Just in case, he used to say. I understood that now. It wasn't about fear. It was about preparation. Because people don't always show you who they are until they think you're no longer in the way. And that's when it matters most to know exactly where you stand. I stood up. Walked slowly toward the window. The afternoon light had shifted. Softer now. Quieter. Outside, everything moved as it always did. Cars passed. Leaves stirred slightly in the wind. Nothing dramatic. Nothing changed. And that was the point. Because the biggest shifts don't happen where everyone can see them. They happen quietly. Inside decisions. Inside understanding. I rested my hand lightly against the glass. Cool. Real. Grounded. Because that's what I had now. Not anger. Not resentment. Something steadier. Control. They thought they had removed me. Reduced me. Labeled me into something smaller. Something easier to move around. The absent old lady. I let that phrase pass through my mind one last time. Not as an insult, as a reminder of what they believed and how wrong they were. Because I was never absent. Not from that room, not from this house, and not from what mattered. I turned away from the window, walked back into the room. Everything still in its place, exactly as it should be, because nothing had been taken from me. Not really. They hadn't removed my place. They had only shown me where they thought I didn't belong. And in doing that, they revealed something far more important. They didn't understand what I still had, or what had already been decided long before they tried to decide it for me. I sat down once more, calm, still, not waiting, not reacting, just certain, because whatever they thought they were stepping into, they were about to learn something simple. You can't take something that was never yours, and you can't remove someone who never left. Top of form, bottom of form, top of form, bottom of form, top of form, bottom of form. Top of form, bottom of form, 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 top of form, bottom of form.